Welcome back to the deep dive. If the news cycle this week felt less like reporting and more like, I don't know, a series of unexpected earthquakes, you are definitely not alone.
Not at all.
We are diving into a stack of sources covering the first full trading week of 2026, and the headlines are they're defined by these simultaneous, unprecedented shocks, geopolitical, technological, environmental, all hitting at once.
It's not just a dense collection of headlines, It's a
Yeah.
moment of rapid global acceleration.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is that these long-established international norms, market assumptions about stability, even the core resilience of our physical infrastructure,
It's all being tested.
all at the same time. And when something as globally disruptive as a targeted military operation against a sitting head of state occurs, the world is forced to recalibrate.
Right.
And to do it at lightning speed. All those existing risk calculations just get thrown out the window.
That's exactly the mission here. Our job is to filter that tremendous signal-to-noise ratio and deliver the crucial long-term insights you need from this overwhelming stack of information. Today's deep dive is going to take us from a constitutional crisis in South America to, the molecular level, the AI arms race, and right through to the breakdown of air traffic control systems because of aging equipment.
And the complexity really demands context. We have to go beyond just cataloging the events.
Yeah.
We need to understand the underlying mechanisms, the legal precedents being broken, the structural shifts in technology, and of course, the financial implications of all these converging risks.
So here is our roadmap. We are starting in the eye of the storm. The immediate, massive geopolitical disruption caused by the U.S. operation in Venezuela will focus particularly on sovereignty and these market paradoxes. Then we'll move quickly across other key international flashpoints where alliances are being strained. After that, we shift entirely. We'll look at the long-term structural changes driven by the AI arms race, the battle for semiconductor supremacy, and the shifting rules of global commerce.
And we'll finish up by looking at vulnerability.
Exactly. We'll conclude by examining the increasing vulnerability of our essential systems, health, infrastructure, and climate readiness to failure.
It's a dense but a vital dive. Let's start with that immense shockwave that originated in Caracas.
The defining event of this period, and without a doubt, was the U.S. military operation on or around January 3rd, 2026. It captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and immediately transferred him to New York to face drug trafficking charges.
And this is such a fundamental shift.
For years, the U.S. had relied on sanctions, on diplomatic isolation, recognizing opposition figures instead of the Maduro regime. But this direct seizure represents an absolute change in policy.
It overturns the status quo completely. It's the culmination of years of escalating tension, economic pressure, and real humanitarian concern.
So what kept Maduro in power for so long?
Well, he'd managed to maintain power by ensuring the loyalty of key military and civilian security forces, and critically, by securing financial and diplomatic support from global rivals like Russia and China.
Right.
This direct U.S. action just been at. It bypassed all of that. It bypassed all conventional diplomatic channels, betting that the cost of intervention would be outweighed by the perceived strategic gain.
And the sheer drama of the capture was almost immediately replaced by the legal drama, wasn't it?
Oh, instantly.
Maduro pleaded not guilty in a Manhattan federal court. What does it even mean for him to stand in a U.S. courtroom and insist he remains Venezuela's legitimate sitting president?
It's a direct conflict. It's a conflict between a national legal jurisdiction and the international principle of state sovereignty.
Can you break that down?
Sure. A key tenet of international law is the non-intervention principle, which prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Full stop.
So by forcibly removing a sitting head of state.
The U.S. is prioritizing its domestic legal claims. Specifically, these old indictments related to drug trafficking over that foundational international norm. This creates a powerful legal and political dilemma that, frankly, will echo for decades. Hashtag 1.1, the capture and the crisis of legitimacy.
And that clash was on display almost immediately at the United Nations, an Emergency Security Council meeting. The sources describe it as a diplomatic firestorm. The U.S. defended the action, calling it a targeted law enforcement operation.
That was the line, yes.
But the global criticism was pointed, wasn't it?
Heavily pointed, yes. The core criticism, and it was voiced not just by rivals like Russia and China, but also by some U.S. allies.
Oh, really? Allies, too?
Yes. It's centered on the dangerous precedent, this says.
Which is what exactly?
Look, when a powerful military is used to unilaterally seize the leader of a smaller sovereign nation based on domestic legal charges, the critics argue it destabilizes the entire international system.
It opens a Pandora's box.
It does. They warned explicitly of potential copycat interventions, where other major powers might justify similar actions to settle political or economic scores in their own spheres of influence.
And the U.S. intent, as outlined publicly by President Trump, went far beyond a simple law enforcement mission.
Way beyond.
The rhetoric suggested a broader nation-building or, at the very least, an economic intervention.
And that's the critical distinction that really complicates the U.S. narrative. President Trump publicly declared that the U.S. would, and this is a quote, run Venezuela temporarily.
And then there was the oil.
Of course. Administration officials confirmed that U.S. oil companies were ready to invest billions to rapidly restore crude production capacity, which has been, severely degraded for years.
So when you combine those statements with reports of actual U.S. military strikes and raids inside Venezuela,
the framing of the operation as merely law enforcement and humanitarian starts to fray. It really does.
It transforms the narrative from capturing a wanted criminal into an assertion of temporary economic and political control.
It does.
And that immediately raises questions about the scope of executive power, the absence of congressional authorization for a military action that now has these explicit nation-building implications.
And the economic motivation, access to those massive oil reserves is an inescapable lens through which the global community views this entire intervention.
Exactly. The line between prosecuting an indicted criminal and engaging in geopolitical intervention becomes extremely hard to discern.
Especially when the stated end goal involves securing economic interests and temporarily managing the state. It's a blurry line, to say the least. Hashtag 1.2, the question of successor and continuity.
Okay, so despite this immense pressure, the shock of Maduro's capture, the regime apparatus didn't immediately shatter.
No, it didn't.
Venezuela's vice president and oil minister, Delcy Rodriguez, was formally sworn in as interim president on January 5th.
A very calculated move.
It seems like it was aimed at projecting order.
This quick succession was vital for them. The regime needed to signal internal cohesion to the military leadership, to the state oil company employees, and to the entire civilian bureaucracy. The goal was to demonstrate that the state structure,
which is very centralized,
was extremely centralized, concentrated power among a small group of loyalists. They had to show it could survive the removal of its figurehead without collapsing into chaos or, civil war.
But the deeper analysis reveals this continuity wasn't accidental from the U.S. perspective either.
No.
We had sources pointing to a CIA assessment that anticipated this exact scenario. Tell us more about that.
This is a crucial detail reported in our stack. The CIA assessment presented to President Trump before the operation suggested that senior regime loyalists, including Rodriguez,
the person who took over,
exactly, that they were actually the most stable option for preventing state failure immediately following Maduro's removal.
So wait, the U.S. was calculating that the best outcome in the short term was for the regime to continue.
It suggests a very calculated approach. The U.S. prioritized short-term stability over an immediate, potentially messy, democratic transition.
So the U.S. essentially accepted, or even implicitly greenlit, a successor from within the existing power structure just to manage the immediate aftermath.
That's the interpretation many analysts are making, yes. While the desire for a democratic transition remains the stated long-term goal, the CIA assessment recognized the severe risks of a total state vacuum.
And that would be catastrophic.
Utterly. So an insider succession avoids that catastrophic collapse, but it significantly complicates the path toward real political change.
So the skeptics would argue that.
Skeptics argue that while the face at the top changes, the underlying system of corruption and entrenched power, often referred to as Chavismo, remains firmly in place.
And this presents a tough diplomatic challenge for nations worldwide. Do they recognize this interim leader, who emerged from the regime but promises stability?
Or do they hold out for a truly democratic outcome, risking further instability and potentially slowing the recovery of global oil supplies? It's a profound dilemma.
The choices made by key players, like Brazil, Colombia, the EU, they're going to set the trajectory for the entire region.
They absolutely will. Recognition grants legitimacy and may unlock oil, but it undermines the moral justification for the intervention. Non-recognition upholds democratic ideals, but might prolong the humanitarian crisis. There are no easy answers here. Hashtag TechTag 1.3 domestic U.S. political fallout.
Bringing this back home, the Venezuela operation instantly polarized U.S. domestic politics.
As you'd expect.
Primarily around the constitutional limits of presidential authority in using military force abroad.
This action became the perfect political fault line. On one side, you had progressive Democrats and some constitutional scholars immediately condemn the operation as an illegal or an unconstitutional use of force.
And their objection wasn't necessarily supporting Maduro.
No, not at all. They had long denounced him. Their objection was the lack of congressional authorization for what many of them viewed as, well, a military invasion. The question was, does the president have the unilateral authority to seize a head of state in this manner?
And the White House response was to immediately pivot the conversation to one of political expediency and, well, alleged hypocrisy.
Precisely. The White House accused the critics of opposing the capture simply because of who ordered it.
Because Trump ordered it.
Right. This counterargument cleverly reframed the debate, suggesting that critics were putting partisan politics above achieving a strategic foreign policy goal, the removal of an indicted dictator. It's a very effective tactic for blurring the lines between a foreign policy objective and constitutional due process.
We're seeing the political impact ripple immediately into primary races, like the closely watched Republican primary in Kentucky.
Yes.
This forces candidates to address these fundamental trade-offs involved in executive power.
Strategists are viewing this as a critical test case for voters. How do they balance competing interests?
Right. On one side, you have the clear economic incentive, the promise of restoring access to massive Venezuelan oil reserves, which, appeals strongly to energy-focused and conservative voters.
And on the other?
On the other, you have deep concerns about the legality of the intervention, the violation of international norms, and the risk of those unintended consequences that so often accompany military actions abroad.
So the way this issue is embraced or rejected by voters will be?
It will be highly predictive of the broader electorate sentiment toward an assertive, unilateralist foreign policy agenda. It's a real bellwether. Hashtag 1.4 market paradox and risk repricing.
Okay. This is the part of the story that most confused me initially. You have this massive geopolitical shock, a sitting president forcibly removed. Yet on January 5th, major stock indexes, including the Dow,
They gained.
They hit a new record high. That feels utterly counterintuitive. What explains this market paradox? It's not counterintuitive if you look at what the market is currently pricing in. Global investors, particularly those in U.S. equities, appear to be betting on two specific, highly resilient narratives.
Okay, what are they?
First, ongoing, sustained economic growth. And second, the powerful, almost singular rally driven by the massive momentum in AI-related stocks.
So AI enthusiasm effectively outweighed the risk of interventionist wars.
For the broad indices, yes, it seems so. For them, the Venezuela shock was seen as a regional geopolitical event, not an existential threat to the core technological and economic engine of the U.S. economy. The market is increasingly segmented.
But if you look at the energy sector...
That's where the tension was immediately apparent.
Exactly.
Oil prices rose and settled higher, and energy shares climbed significantly.
What does that tell us?
This reflects the intense uncertainty surrounding Venezuela's oil flows.
So how were traders viewing that uncertainty? Were they worried about disruption, or were they celebrating potential access?
It was a split bet, which is why the volatility was contained primarily to that sector. Short term, there was definitely concern about instability and potential disruption to any existing crude exports. Long term, however, some investors were placing massive bets on the eventual expansion of Venezuelan production under new political arrangements.
Which could be a game changer for global supply.
It could fundamentally alter global supply dynamics over the next few years, and that potential windfall was priced in immediately, despite the current risks.
And the safe haven assets, like gold, they provided the necessary balance check on that optimism.
Absolutely. Gold prices climbed to a one-week high. This indicates that while equity traders were focusing on AI profits, a significant portion of capital managers were hedging. They were hedging against the risk of wider conflict, generalized instability, or the possibility that the Venezuela intervention might spark escalation elsewhere.
So gold prices reflect the underlying anxiety.
They reflect the anxiety that the geopolitical system has become far more fragile than the Dow Jones might suggest.
The ultimate question for the energy market, then, is velocity. If the market is betting on expansion, how long does that recovery really take?
The expert consensus is deeply cautious on this. Analysts are warning that rebuilding Venezuela's output capacity would take many years, not months.
Why so long?
The infrastructure pipelines, refineries, extraction equipment, it has suffered from massive decay and mismanagement under years of sanctions and neglect.
So even with billions of dollars committed.
Even with billions committed, the conditions for safe, reliable investment are still highly uncertain under an interim government. Therefore, the market's initial rally priced in the potential long-term removal of a political obstacle, but it has not fully accounted for the multi-year reality of infrastructure repair and political stabilization required to achieve that output.
So the risk hasn't vanished.
No, it's simply morphed from political risk to complex long-term capital risk.
The Venezuela operation really defined the limits being placed on national sovereignty, and that theme carries forward as we look at other flashpoints globally.
Yes, some characterized by rhetoric, others by ongoing military action.
Let's start with the rhetoric.
We shift our focus to the Arctic, an area of increasing strategic importance.
Because of climate change, right? New shipping lanes, access to resources.
Exactly. New shipping lanes and access to vast mineral resources. And Greenland, an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, sits right in the middle of this emerging great power competition.
And this week, President Trump explicitly renewed his push to take over Greenland.
This is not just old rhetoric being rehashed. This time, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen publicly confirmed that the U.S. president was serious.
Which would force Greenland's hand.
It did. It forced Greenland's government to issue an immediate, strong public rejection, labeling the repeated push as unacceptable.
This sounds less like a viable policy option and more like a tool to test the strain limits of the NATO alliance.
That's precisely it. What are the wider implications here? Well, the issue instantly became a test of NATO unity. Denmark is a foundational NATO ally.
Right.
For the U.S. to repeatedly push a claim on a portion of its sovereign territory, even if it's just rhetorically, it signals a disregard for the internal political stability of its allies.
And it must raise fundamental questions among smaller allied nations.
It does. Questions about the reliability of security guarantees when strategic assets, like Greenland's access to the Arctic, become intensely valuable to major powers.
So the diplomatic cost is incurred even without a formal move.
Oh, absolutely.
It signals intent and undermines alliance trust right when NATO needs cohesion to address conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East.
It absolutely does. The rhetoric directly complicates broader cooperation. It feeds into existing European concerns about the growing militarization of the Arctic and signals that, in the eyes of Washington, strategic economic and security interests might just supersede the political integrity of even the closest allies. This weakens the perceived reliability of the alliance structure itself.
We turn now to two enduring conflicts, where these constant, low-level lethal incidents continue to define the diplomatic landscape. Starting with Ukraine. On January 5th, a Russian airstrike on Kyiv caused civilian casualties.
This specific strike was significant because it resulted in the first reported civilian deaths in the capital that year.
And there was a critical detail, wasn't it?
Yes. One fatality was linked to a fire at a medical facility in the Obolonsky district. And while Russia claims to target military infrastructure, these strikes invariably hit essential civilian services, power generation, heating, and in this case, a medical facility.
Which is particularly devastating during the winter months.
That's true.
Strategically, what is the goal of these persistent attacks on civilian infrastructure?
The strategy is multifaceted. It aims to degrade Ukraine's essential services, wear down public morale, and impose massive economic costs.
And on the diplomatic front?
On the diplomatic front, these attacks fuel international condemnation and intensify Kyiv's demand for sophisticated Western air defense systems, forcing NATO allies to deepen their involvement.
But what about the internal impact?
That's perhaps the most enduring impact. Internally, these acts harden public anger and national resolve, making any path toward future political compromise with Moscow vastly more difficult.
Shifting to Gaza, the ceasefire remains incredibly strained, with lethal incidents continuing to undermine any sense of stability for civilians.
Yes, the reports from January 5th detailed an Israeli airstrike in southern Gaza that struck a tent sheltering displaced people.
And it killed at least 2 individuals.
Including a 5-year-old girl, yes. Israel's stated defense was that the strike targeted a Hamas militant who was planning an imminent attack.
This just highlights the impossible dynamic of urban conflict even under a nominal ceasefire.
Precisely. The continued occurrence of these lethal incidents, even under a ceasefire framework, raises immense questions about compliance and humanitarian law. It profoundly deepens the humanitarian crisis for the displaced population, as nowhere feels truly safe.
And it erodes the credibility of the ceasefire itself.
Critically, yes, it erodes the public and political credibility of the ceasefire, intensifying international scrutiny and complicating efforts to secure a more permanent, stable resolution. For stabilization to work, the civilian population must perceive an absolute reduction in risk, which clearly is not happening. Hashtag 2.3 challenges in regional stabilization.
Okay, so given the intense pressures in these conflicts, diplomatic efforts are running in parallel to solidify long-term security guarantees for allies. We saw a push to turn broad pledges into concrete support for Ukraine.
This is a crucial area. National security advisors from Europe and key allies met this week, preparing for a high-level Paris meeting.
And the focus is on moving beyond just moral support.
Exactly. Moving beyond vague pledges to crafting a durable defense architecture for Ukraine. This means committing to long-term structures, multi-year aid packages that survive domestic political shifts, sustained training missions, and guaranteed continuous air defense support.
What's the strategic goal of these guarantees beyond just military aid?
The goal is twofold. First, to create a credible, sustained deterrence against Russia over long term. Second, and this is crucial, to reassure investors.
The money.
Right. If reconstruction efforts are ever to succeed, investors must be confident that the security situation is stable and that political shifts in donor countries won't instantly pull the rug out from under stabilization efforts. These guarantees are about risk reduction for future capital investment as much as they are about military capability.
Meanwhile, the effort to assemble an international stabilization force for Gaza seems to be struggling to get off the ground entirely.
It's facing severe resistance, yes. The Trump administration proposed this force, but we saw a major setback on January 5th when Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev declined to send troops.
Why?
He cited a reluctance to deploy forces outside his country for peacekeeping.
And this highlights Washington's difficulty in assembling these kinds of multinational forces when the mission risks are high and the political end state is undefined.
Absolutely. No major country has formally committed troops yet, which reflects deep international skepticism. Potential partners are concerned about mission creep, the high risk of casualties in an active environment, and the crucial question of legitimacy.
Who would this force even report to?
Exactly. Who would it report to? How would it interact with the local populace and potential Palestinian Authority leadership? Without a clear, agreed-upon political governance plan for Gaza, assembling a multinational force remains incredibly difficult and is likely to continue stalling.
And finally, we saw a quiet, pragmatic resumption of U.S.-mediated security talks between Syria and Israel after months of silence.
Yes, these are very high-stakes talks regarding the contested border area.
What are the demands from each side?
Well, Syria's demand is a full Israeli withdrawal to positions held before the fall of Bashar al-Assad in late 2024.
And Israel.
Israel's demand, conversely, is for robust security guarantees, including the demilitarization of the southwestern Syria region and explicit protections for minority populations along the border.
Those sound like non-negotiable red lines for each side. So why bother talking?
Because communication is deconfliction. Even if a grand bargain on territorial disputes is impossible right now, the talks serve to reduce the immediate risk of an unintended cross-border escalation, which could drag in regional powers like Iran.
So the negotiation itself is the point.
In a way, yes. It signals an intent to manage the crisis. However, the domestic political constraints on both sides mean that flexibility on those core territorial demands is minimal. The danger is that the talks could become a permanent fixture that merely normalizes the current unstable reality without moving toward a true resolution.
We transition now from immediate political crises to the long-term structural changes defining global competition. This is where innovation, particularly in AI and chips, is accelerating at a breakneck pace.
And it's forcing governments to rapidly adapt their regulatory frameworks and security strategies. Hashtag 3.1, the geopolitical battlefield of semiconductors.
Let's start with chips. The global supply chain relies fundamentally on Taiwan's advanced semiconductor manufacturing capabilities.
It does, and this has made the island the central arena for technological and geopolitical gray zone competition, primarily through cyber warfare.
The scale of the cyber onslaught reported by Taiwan's National Security Bureau in 2025 was truly massive. Let's quantify that for the listener.
It's astonishing. Taiwan reported an average of about 2.63 million suspected cyber attacks per day throughout 2025.
Per day.
Per day. And this wasn't just background noise. This volume surged during periods of increased political tension or Chinese military exercises. The sophistication is also key. The attacks employed multiple methods, including distributed denial of service or DDoS, and the more insidious man-in-the-middle attacks.
Why does a man-in-the-middle attack targeting critical infrastructure like a hospital or an energy company matter more than a simple DDoS attack that just floods a server?
A DDoS attack is about disruption. It's about taking systems offline. It's loud. A man-in-the-middle attack is about stealth, espionage, and data manipulation. It places the attacker silently between two communicating parties, allowing them to read, insert, or modify data in transit without either party knowing.
And when those are aimed at science parks,
Or banks, or energy grids, or crucially science parks tied to the semiconductor ecosystem, the goal is often long-term intelligence gathering, supply chain interference, or inserting back doors for potential future coercion.
so the consistent cyber pressure erodes trust and makes the global semiconductor supply chain inherently more fragile.
Exactly. It forces Taiwanese infrastructure operators and tech firms to dedicate enormous resources to defense. For global businesses, it's a direct warning that the geopolitical tensions in the strait are being fought daily in the digital sphere, threatening the reliability of their advanced chip sourcing. The infrastructure that produces the world's most critical technology is now a persistent digital battlefield.
And Taiwan is recognizing this strategic importance by taking aggressive legal action to protect its technological know-how. We saw additional indictments filed in the Tokyo Electron Trade Secrets case this week.
This signals a massive strategic shift. Taiwan is moving past treating these as simple commercial espionage cases.
They're treating it as national security now.
They are. They are now treating technological IP, the detailed processes and proprietary knowledge behind chip design and manufacturing, as a strategic national security asset. This is a direct response to the global race for localization and the U.S.-China technology rivalry.
Why is this legal signal so important right now?
Because stricter IP enforcement is Taiwan's primary defense against technological erosion. It's an attempt to deter individuals and firms from transferring that know-how quietly to rivals. In an environment where every major power is trying to localize its chip supply, maintaining absolute control over cutting-edge technological secrets is seen as essential leverage in the future global economy. Hashtag TEDTech 3.2, the accelerating AI arms race.
Moving from the chips themselves to the future of computing, the AI boom continues to accelerate, driven by this insatiable need for processing power. NVIDIA, the key enabler here, made a huge announcement at CES 2026.
A massive one, yes. CEO Jensen Huang confirmed that the next-generation Vera Rubin platform was in full production.
What does that signal?
This announcement confirms the shift in the AI arms race. It's no longer just about optimizing individual components, it's about optimizing the entire infrastructure stack.
Explain what makes the Vera Rubin platform different. Why is rack scale system the key phrase here?
Okay, think of it this way. Historically, you would buy individual, highly specialized parts, a high-end CPU, a specific GPU, networking cards, and then you'd spend immense effort optimizing them to work together in a data center rack.
Right.
The Vera Rubin platform is the shift from selling the parts to selling the fully integrated, pre-tuned race car. It's a tightly integrated system spanning CPU, GPU, high-speed networking, and security components.
So by integrating everything at the rack level, they are fundamentally solving the bandwidth and latency problems that slow down massive AI model training.
Exactly. Latency and memory bandwidth are the two greatest bottlenecks in training advanced models, like large language models. By engineering the entire rack system together, NVIDIA is designed to deliver dramatically higher AI computing capability while simultaneously lowering the cost and improving the performance per watt for these energy-hungry systems. It sets a new baseline for what constitutes cutting-edge AI infrastructure.
This AI boom is forcing major structural changes, not just in hardware design, but in the underlying architectures. We see the rise of open standard chips, like RISC-V.
The rise of RISC-V is a massive geopolitical and technological story. It's an open standard instruction set architecture, meaning the blueprints are public and accessible.
Unlike proprietary architectures like ARM or x86.
Correct, which are controlled by Western companies and therefore subject to U.S. export controls. RISC-V offers a path for countries, notably China, to build sophisticated chips without relying on regulated Western technology.
So RISC-V is essentially a strategic end run around current and future export controls.
That is precisely why it is gaining momentum globally. It allows big tech and national programs to reduce reliance on the US and Europe, complicating the long-term effectiveness of technology denial strategies.
And the AI boom reinforces this trend.
It does, because every country needs access to enormous, scalable compute power, and they are seeking paths that are not vulnerable to foreign political pressure.
And finally, the immense energy demand of these systems. The data centers powering this innovation are forcing a rapid reevaluation of energy strategy.
The energy footprint is colossal. The AI boom is forcing big tech to adopt an all-of-the-above energy strategy. While companies are aggressively pursuing renewables and power purchase agreements, or PPAs, the sheer explosive demand for reliable 247 power is outstripping the immediate supply of green energy.
So what are they doing?
Consequently, they're heavily relying on gas and, perhaps most surprisingly, seriously exploring and investing in modular nuclear energy solutions to reliably power these expanding data centers. Sustainability goals are colliding hard with the immediate reality of energy consumption. Hashtag 3.3 shifting rules of global commerce.
As the technological engine accelerates, the world of global commerce and domestic regulatory policy is struggling to keep pace, leading to high-stakes legal and policy adjustments. Let's start with the global minimum tax.
This is a complex but crucial international agreement. The goal of the OECD Global Minimum Tax Framework is to stop multinational corporations from shifting profits to jurisdictions with extremely low corporate tax rates.
Essentially ending the race to the bottom.
Exactly, a race that eroded national tax bases worldwide.
On January 5th, over 145 countries agreed on an update to that deal. Why was this update necessary, and what did it aim to achieve?
The update was primarily intended to address technical concerns and pushback from major economies, specifically the United States, regarding complex issues like tax credits and the treatment of certain foreign subsidiaries. The update aims to standardize the rules enough to prevent countries from triggering new unilateral retaliatory tax or trade measures against each other.
So supporters see it as stabilizing revenue and ensuring fairer competition. What are the concerns from critics?
The primary criticisms revolve around compliance costs, especially for medium-sized businesses operating internationally, and the reduction of tax policy flexibility. Critics argue that forcing a high minimum tax rate severely limits a country's ability to use tax incentives to attract specific types of foreign direct investment, potentially handcuffing national economic development strategies.
It's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off between global fairness and national policy autonomy.
Moving to the U.S. labor environment, the National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB, is poised for a major policy shift with a newly appointed Republican majority. This has significant consequences for workers in logistics and tech.
The NLRB is the primary body that interprets and enforces federal labor law regarding union organizing and collective bargaining. Since the board's decisions set precedent, a change in majority can rapidly alter the playing field.
And the incoming majority is expected to be less favorable to unions.
An agenda less favorable to unions and more supportive of management interests, yes.
What does that mean practically for the organizing drives we've seen surging in places like Amazon warehouses or tech companies?
It means the rules of engagement are likely to change dramatically. We could see new precedents regarding what constitutes illegal employer speech during organizing drives, stricter standards for defining joint employer status, and greater difficulty in establishing bargaining units.
And labor advocates worry this will.
They worry this shift will weaken bargaining power, chill ongoing organizing efforts in high-growth sectors like retail and logistics, and reduce protections for workers who attempt to form unions.
Finally, President Trump publicly challenged the Supreme Court regarding his ability to levy tariffs. This elevates trade policy into a constitutional question.
It's a battle over the separation of powers. Tariffs have been a core, powerful tool of U.S. statecraft for this administration, often leveraged under broad, decades-old statutes related to national security or emergency powers.
And the president publicly warned the court that curbing this authority would be a terrible blow to U.S. national security.
And the nation's prosperity, yes.
What exactly are the constitutional stakes here, and who is arguing against the president's power?
The argument being advanced by opponents, often businesses and trade groups, is that Congress, under the Constitution, holds the exclusive power to regulate commerce and set tariffs. They argue the president has exceeded the scope delegated to the executive branch, effectively legislating economic policy through executive order.
And the outcome of this will define.
It will define whether tariffs remain a near unilateral tool of U.S. foreign and economic policy, or if the power swings back to Congress, requiring a much more deliberative, slower process for initiating trade conflicts. It determines whether U.S. trade policy can be rapidly altered with an election, or if it must endure a long legislative consensus.
In our final section, we move back to the physical world, focusing on the vulnerability of the critical systems we rely on, from aviation control to public health to technical failure and climate shocks. Hashtag 4.1 vulnerable infrastructure.
A stark demonstration of vulnerability occurred in Greece on January 4th and 5th. A major radio communications failure caused a widespread blackout in Greek airspace.
And that's a crucial hub for European and Middle Eastern air traffic.
It is.
I understand this failure grounded, diverted, and delayed flights, causing immense chaos across a vast area. What was the immediate cause, and why did it prompt such alarm?
Well, while officials quickly determined that a cyber attack was unlikely, the cause was likely an internal technical breakdown related to aging systems. The effect was identical to a sophisticated attack.
Mass disruption, loss of control.
Severe erosion of confidence. The alarming insight here is that decades of underinvestment in maintenance, outdated hardware, and potential staffing shortages can produce a systemic failure just as destructive as a malicious state-sponsored attack.
So the immediate threat is technical decay, not necessarily infiltration.
Exactly. It forces governments to reckon with the fact that their critical infrastructure, whether it's air traffic control, utility grids, or public transit, has built-in points of failure that can be triggered by internal errors just as easily as external threats. Confidence in air travel, a cornerstone of the global economy, depends on robust redundancy and a commitment to modernizing these complex, interconnected systems.
And speaking of system stress, extreme weather also crippled major European transportation hubs this week.
Yes, heavy snow and ice struck key travel hubs on January 5th. The disruption was immense. France requested airlines cancel 15% of flights at both Charles de Gaulle and Orly, Paris's main airports.
And in Amsterdam.
Meanwhile, Amsterdam's Schiphol airport had to cancel approximately 450 flights.
When you look at those numbers, that's not just a minor inconvenience. That is massive economic disruption.
Absolutely. The economic costs are staggering. Delayed cargo, lost productivity from travelers, missed business meetings, and severe disruption to logistics networks. It's a powerful illustration of how climate volatility, which produces these increasingly extreme localized events, stresses these interconnected European networks.
And it strengthens the argument for investment.
It strengthens the argument for massive investments in resilient infrastructure, improved runway clearing technology, better integration of rail alternatives, and more sophisticated forecasting across borders. The cost of proactive hardening is increasingly less than the cost of reactive disaster management. Hashtag 4.2 public health and transition.
Turning to public health, we are navigating ongoing seasonal threats alongside a controversial change in official guidance that could impact millions of families. First, the flu season.
The U.S. CDC classified the 2025-26 flu season as moderately severe, with cases estimated around 11 million already.
And that high volume inevitably strains healthcare systems.
It does, particularly hospitals dealing with simultaneous surges of flu, RSV, and persistent COVID-19 cases. It signals that we are still far from a state where seasonal respiratory illnesses are easily absorbed by the healthcare infrastructure.
And globally, we are seeing renewed concerns about H5N1 bird flu, particularly in India.
Yes, India reported 11 outbreaks of highly pathogenic H5N1 bird flu in Kerala in December 2025. This led to large-scale poultry losses and culling.
And health agencies worldwide view H5N1 with extreme caution.
They do, not only because of the immediate impact on food supply and pricing, but because of the potential for spillover risk to humans. Although human-to-human transmission remains rare, the constant exposure of poultry workers and farmers means agencies must remain on high alert for any genetic mutation that could allow the virus to become more easily transmissible among people.
Now, for the major policy shift. Following a presidential memorandum, the CDC updated the U.S. childhood immunization schedule, fundamentally changing the guidance for flu and COVID vaccines.
This is a critical change rooted in political directives, not necessarily public health data. The new guidance shifts away from broad, routine recommendations for flu and COVID vaccines,
And now recommends them.
only after consultation with a healthcare provider.
And this comes at a time when vaccine uptake was already worryingly low.
Dangerously low. Only 16.3% of U.S. adults and a staggering 7.4% of children had received the updated 2025-26 COVID vaccine by late December.
Why are public health leaders so concerned about requiring this consultation step?
Public health leaders and advocacy groups issued strong warnings. They argue that inserting an extra required step, the mandated consultation, creates unnecessary barriers to access.
And this particularly impacts low-income families.
Yes, families with limited transportation or those in communities with poor access to primary care. The fear is that even a small structural hurdle can significantly reduce overall coverage, widen existing health disparities, and increase the risk of localized outbreaks of preventable diseases like flu and COVID.
While some frame this as promoting individual choice, the cautionary tale is that collective immunity relies on maximizing convenience and access.
Precisely. Low vaccine coverage ensures that winter surges will continue to unduly strain hospitals, increase mortality, and create more opportunities for viral evolution. This policy shift really complicates the transition of COVID-19 from a pandemic crisis into a manageable, predictable, seasonal illness. #ChagPag 4.3, the cost of climate extremes.
In our final look at systems under stress, the physical environment is forcing us to confront the volatility of climate change and its impact on infrastructure. Southern California experienced a massive deluge this week.
Southern California is a prime example of climate volatility, swinging violently between extreme drought and massive rainfall. A series of powerful winter systems broke rainfall records across the region.
And the immediate impact was disastrous.
Yes, amplified by geography.
That deluge combined with the unusually high king tides. What was the result of that combination?
The confluence of excessive rainfall and the extremely high seasonal tides caused widespread coastal flooding and severe mudslides. This forced the closure of Santa Barbara's airport and major segments of critical state highways, including US 101 and Highway 1.
So emergency services were fully engaged.
Fully engaged in water rescues on flooded freeways.
This volatility forces deep, difficult policy questions about land use.
It does. When high rainfall hits burn-scarred hillsides, mudslides become inevitable. When king tides rise higher, coastal infrastructure is overwhelmed. These recurring, severe events force fierce public debates about whether existing land use planning and building codes are adequate, and whether major infrastructure should be retreated from dense coastal zones or reinforced with huge public works projects.
It's a direct confrontation.
A direct confrontation between existing development patterns and the reality of accelerated climate change.
And the volatility wasn't limited to the West Coast.
Yeah.
A massive bomb cyclone battered the Great Lakes, Midwest, and Northeast.
This storm was truly continental in scale and severity. It brought extreme winds, clocking up to 116 miles per hour in New Hampshire, paralyzing heavy snow across the upper Midwest, and leading to massive traffic pileups.
And most critically,
the storm caused widespread power outages, with over 220,000 customers in the Northeast alone losing power.
this feeds directly into a rising and hugely expensive trend regarding U.S. disasters.
It absolutely reinforces the mounting financial and social cost of climate volatility. These severe winter storms contribute heavily to the rising tally of U.S. billion-dollar weather disasters. This drives calls not just for reactive disaster relief, but for fundamental proactive risk reduction.
Like hardening the grid.
Hardening the utility grid, ensuring better inter-utility cooperation, and shifting municipal planning away from high-risk flood or wind zones. The escalating costs of weather disasters are rapidly becoming a major municipal bond and insurance risk nationwide. #tagoutro.
We have completed a wide-ranging deep dive, covering an intense week defined by converging crises. Looking back across the source material from early January 2026, we can identify, I think, 3 fundamental tensions shaping the global system.
I think so too. First, there's that dramatic clash between national sovereignty and interventionist impulses.
Right, spectacularly demonstrated by the seizure of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela and the continued rhetorical pressure on Greenland.
It forces the world to confront which international norms are truly sacrosanct and which can be challenged by powerful states pursuing their own national security and economic interests.
Second, the dizzying speed of technological change, the unveiling of the integrated Vera Rubin AI platform, the rise of geopolitical bypass architectures like RISC-V.
And that's all set against the painfully slow pace of global governance, whether it's coordinating the global minimum tax or establishing clear rules for technological IP protection when it's under threat.
And finally, the increasing visible vulnerability of our core physical systems.
From aging aviation control equipment in Greece to the widespread power outages caused by the bomb cyclone, all layered on top of structural health challenges.
Like a severe flu season colliding with politically driven changes in public health guidance and critically low vaccine uptake. It's a perfect storm.
It really is.
We noted that global markets, specifically the Dow, rallied and hit a record high despite the immense geopolitical shock caused by the forcible capture of a sitting foreign president. So here's the final provocative thought for you to carry forward. Does this seemingly unflappable market resilience genuinely mean that investors believe powerful economies are truly shockproof and strong enough to absorb any level of political turmoil?
Or does it suggest that the true long-term costs of this instability, the expense of repairing fractured alliances, the legal fallout of eroded international norms, and the mounting financial burden of continuously hardening, strained physical infrastructure have yet to be factored into the global balance sheet?